Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined as always by our fearless leader, the managing editor of Horns 24/7, Taylor Estes. Taylor, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Chip. How are you doing?
I mean, we are at the midpoint of spring football.
We
We're
are.
at the midpoint of Texas Longhorns spring football, coming off that 5-7 2021 season, and then the off season of all off seasons, one of the best off seasons in college football, with the hiring of two talented new position coaches and Brennan Marion and Tashard Choice. You bring on Gary Patterson as a special assistant to the head coach. We don't even know what that means. It's like G14 classified special assistant to the head coach, Gary Patterson. And then the recruiting class, top 5 recruiting class, all full of offensive linemen and defensive linemen. And now here we are, 7 practices into spring ball. There will be 15 practices, including the spring game on April 23rd. And so we are going to give you a couple of nuggets from observing practice today. And then we're going to get into sort of a mid-spring football, maybe a couple things that are exciting to us, maybe a concern. So sit back, relax, and let's talk some Texas football. All right, so
Never
Taylor,
ends here on the Flagship podcast, Chip. As we always say, it never ends.
never
And
ends.
when you talk about the season, it's almost like that was just a bad dream, I think, right? The off seasons erase the 5-7 mentality, right?
Remember that first half of the OU game?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I mean, it looked like everything was better. It looked like everything was clicking, that the arrow was going up, 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 that they were going to just drum OU into the ground. And if Spencer Rattler would have remained the quarterback, Texas probably would have drummed the Sooners into the ground. But then real life happened. Caleb Williams happened.
We don't need to rehash the details, Chip, I
Yeah,
think.
but the first half. Remember the first half? Remember
Yeah.
how good that
And now
was?
we're a new team, right? That we're
Now it's a
talking
whole new team.
about here.
Now it's a whole new team. Casey Thompson threw for 5 touchdowns in that game. He's at Nebraska. Now you've got a whole new situation, kind of a rebuild. And so let's get into it, Taylor. We were at practice this morning. We're recording on Tuesday, and one of the things, we don't get a great look, an extended look, if you will, but one of the things that jumped out was Jaden Hullaby, who has been a linebacker the past 2 seasons at Texas. He played running back in high school, and now he's at running back. So people are like, okay, Jaden Hullaby, he's still on the team. Well, I thought it was interesting because we did ask Steve Sarkisian, about it after practice, and he said, he's a bigger guy. Maybe he can do some of the things that Roschon Johnson can do. So they're taking a look at it. And the first thing that goes through your mind is, well, okay, linebacker has been a big position of concern in terms of depth. So they must be feeling good about who they've got at linebacker right now.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the conversation we've been having, Taylor, that Jalen Ford and David Benda are 2 names we continue to hear as, players who are having a really good spring. And then you throw in Devin Richardson and DeMarvion Overshawn, and there's your 2 deep at linebacker.
Yeah, and that's even, before we consider Luke Brockermeyer, who's
Right.
been out with an injury and is not going through, the standard spring. And I think, Chip, this development, it's I'm a little behind the scenes. It was kind of funny because after the practice, we, had about an hour or so before we were able to talk to Sark. So Chip and I went to this cafe over by campus, and we're just kind of mapping out the Flagship podcast. And at one point I was like, let's make sure that was actually him, not like maybe a different running back, possibly, changing numbers or something like that. And it was, and so I think that development it may seem minor right now, but I think from like, going to running backs, I think a lot of people obviously look at the Texas roster and the position that is the most loaded is the running back room. So there may be some people wondering why you're adding more bodies to that position. But if anything, I will look at this as a huge positive development for the linebacker group, because that was a concern going into this year. It was a little bit of a concern up and down play, outside of DeMarvion Overshown last year. And it really hasn't improved or it hadn't, looked like it was improving too much. Then with Jaylan Ford really coming on there, as you mentioned, David Benda, DeMarvion Overshown. I mean, this is a very positive development that I think a lot of people may kind of sweep under the rug right now because of the move to running back. I'm looking at it from the opposite side of the spectrum of what this means for the linebacker room.
Yeah, I mean, look, Bijan Robinson probably going to move on after this season. Probably. Never, don't, count. Don't wish the days away or don't try to predict the future. You can't predict the future, but Bijan Robinson trending in that direction, right? Roschon Johnson is a senior. I mean, so you're loaded at the running back position right now, but you may be, looking for some answers at this time next year. So we'll see. But no doubt that I think right now the storyline is the linebacker position. And what does this mean that they're willing to let Jaden Hullaby move positions? He, as we mentioned, I think there was he was an athlete when he was recruited to Texas. And I think Jaden Hullaby wanted to start at running back. He wanted to start off as a running back, but there was a bigger need at linebacker. Now, clearly, the coaches feel like, at least right now, knock on wood, you got a healthy Jaylan Ford, you got a healthy David Benda. And I'll say this about David Benda. I continue to hear that he's playing more physical than DeMarvion Overshown. And that's why they're splitting reps with the ones. I mean, DeMarvion Overshown is a big time, he's the leading tackler on the team. He's a big, he's kind of the face of the defense, Agent Zero. But they do need him to be more physical. And David Benda, I'm hearing, is playing physical this spring. And Jaylan Ford, I think, is blossoming. We continue to hear it from everyone. We heard it from Josh Thompson as a guy in our Flagship podcast interview a couple of Mondays ago. And don't miss our interview with Derek Johnson, Super DJ, the Longhorn legend, Nagurski Award winner, Butkus Award winner, all-time leading tackler of the Kansas City Chiefs, who we talked to in Monday's podcast. So check that out because he gives his thoughts on the current situation with the Longhorns, what he sees, as well as what he's up to now. So I think that's the story. There was another little story too, Taylor, that Malik Murphy, the early enrollee freshman quarterback who suffered that severe ankle injury in his victorious high school state championship game, is now throwing. Now he's not going to be taking part in 11 on 11 in practice or even 7 on 7, but where he's just standing and throwing like in warmups and individual drills. He is doing that. Looked good. He's moving around pretty well, but Steve Sarkisian continues to temper expectations on that, saying he's about where he should be coming off a quote unquote severe ankle injury.
Right.
So just be patient with Malik Murphy.
Yeah, and when we were watching him today, this was the first practice that we were able to, view where he was actually fully dressed out and a full participant. And the thing, he's obviously he was getting mental reps. Steve Sarkisian obviously talked about, in the off season, learning everything, being in the classroom. Now he's getting a few physical reps, but as you mentioned, you have to temper your expectations because the one thing when you saw the quarterbacks run from one side of the field to the next when they're, switching basically at, the 50-yard line, switching which way they're throwing the ball. Malik Murphy wasn't running at all. He was very, very like maybe briskly walking would probably be, and very favoring that I believe is his right ankle of his. So yeah, I mean it's obviously a huge positive development that he is back because that was a very severe injury that he suffered. But I would say he's nowhere close to being fully back, a part of the rotation or anything. Or I would say if you're a Texas fan, don't expect to hear it too much, honestly, about him in spring football.
Yeah. It's look, the quarterback position is the attention that gets, or the position that gets all the attention, and so everybody's intrigued. Whereas Malik Murphy, this is going to be a development year, it looks like, for Malik Murphy, but who knows? I mean, he certainly looks the part. He looks every bit of 6'5" and 220, and let's see what Steve Sarkisian and AJ Milwee can do with him. And
And he
we'll
stands
be
out for sure because, as you mentioned, I mean, he is all of 6'5" is what shows on his profile. That was today was I mean, though obviously it was the first time that we've been able to see him in full pads and everything. And yeah, that's a big quarterback. So and Texas doesn't have too many of the big guys really anymore at quarterback. So he looks the part for sure. It's going to be interesting to see how quickly he develops. So
Yeah, yeah, we'll get into the quarterback position a little bit later. But Taylor, it's the midpoint of spring, so let's get into a couple of things that stand out or maybe are exciting to you at this point of spring football. Let's start. I think you're going to do one on offense, one on defense, and then we'll list a concern. You wanna go first?
yeah, and I'll start off with offense. I think one of the things that stands out thus far is the progression of Wyoming transfer wide receiver Isaiah Neyor. We heard a lot of very positive things about him when he decided to sign with Texas after being committed to Tennessee. And basically, the 11th hour, Texas goes in there. Steve Sarkisian, Jeff Banks does a good job of getting him to flip his commitment there. He had a productive year at Wyoming, and I think a lot of times when those transfers do have a productive season somewhere else, the expectations skyrocket, especially at a place like Texas. And it sounds from everything that we've been hearing, it sounds like he's actually living up to those expectations right now, and that's a big development for the offense because I think Chip, when we look back at the 2021 season and you talk about the Texas offense, the players people talk about are going to be Bijan Robinson and Xavier Worthy. Well, if you're only having two guys that are going to get the ball, then it's a lot easier to, put double team them or, really just stack the box to stop the run game and stuff. So the more weapons Texas has at receiver, the better. And Isaiah Neyor, thus far at least, seems to be answering the call and really being as good as advertised, I would say, coming out of, that season he had at Wyoming when he had 12 touchdown catches, close to 1,000 yards receiving in an offense that wasn't a really pass heavy type of attack. So that's a positive development. And I would say my sub one would be also the development of Jordan Whittington. It's hard for me to say too much about him because he's always been injured, but I do think as long as he stays healthy, the trio of receivers with Xavier Worthy, Isaiah Neyor, and Jordan Whittington could end up being as correct as good as what people are expecting those three to be at Texas in 2022.
Yeah, and I'll throw in a tiny little sub uh, spoonful of sugar for Casey Kane, who,
Okay.
if people follow the Texas football social media, he had a unbelievable one-handed catch in Saturday's practice against Ryan Watts on a pass from Quinn Ewers, and he got up flexing. Let's see more of that.
Hmm.
Let's see more of that because you're hearing some good things about Casey Kane, that he's really getting after it and trying to move into that two deep. And so, he's 6'3", kind of long, kind of like Isaiah Neyor. So let's continue to see if Casey Kane can put plays like that together, and let's see if he can, get on the field, make an impact, because last year was a developmental year for him. And so you get here, and some of the guys are really adjusting to college life. And then you hear a guy like Josh Thompson talk about, Jalen Gilbo and Terrence Brooks and how they're here to work and they're here to make an impact. And you're starting to hear that about Casey Kane, that he wants to make an impact. So we'll be monitoring his progress. On the offensive side for me, Taylor, this is probably more benefit of the doubt than true excitement, because it's hard to tell just how far the guys on the offensive line are coming. But I just can't get over this opportunity that Andre Carrick has right now at left tackle, and even Jalen Garth, who's backing up Andre Carrick at left tackle, because again, we saw Andre Carrick have some good moments on the field. We've heard his teammates talk about how he's got the disposition, the nastiness, and here he is. He's going to get all these spring practices, both he and Jalen Garth, taking first and second team reps at left tackle because they've moved Christian Jones over to right tackle. And the sense is, okay, well, Kelvin Banks or Devin Campbell, one of the two highest rated offensive linemen in the country, who will be arriving in June, are going to be fighting over one of those, if not two of those starting spots on that offensive line. But this is such a big opportunity for Andre Carrick and Jalen Garth. And considering, Carrick is entering his third year, this is when it should be clicking in, that it's about the job and winning the job. And Jalen Garth has the length, the measurables. And Steve Sarkisian actually gave Jalen Garth some love today.
Yeah.
When I asked about these guys, he said, Jalen Garth's the guy who really remade his body during the 8 weeks of winter conditioning. And you could tell Sarkisian was impressed with that. So let's see it. Let's obviously we're at the midway point, but we know offensive line is under construction, and you'd love it. You'd love it if Andre Carrick and Jalen Garth sees this opportunity and, take big steps forward. Big.
Yeah, and Texas needs it. I mean, the better the competition, the better that the depth is at offensive line is so crucial in the success or the failure of the team. I mean, games are won in the trenches on both sides of the ball, and the offensive line never really gets the credit necessary. Offensive line men, I should say, don't get as much credit, as much flash. They probably don't get as many NIL deals because a lot of they're kind of the faceless names out there more than anything. But these guys have a really big opportunity, Chip, as you mentioned, and Texas offensive line has been, let's be honest, in shambles for decades now. I mean, over a decade, it's been essentially in shambles. And even when Colt McCoy was the quarterback in 2009, I still think I'm convinced that he had so many deficiencies on that offensive line because he was just so elite of a college football quarterback. And so this has been an ongoing problem. And the more these guys can, not just step up themselves, but then the people behind them really push them even further. And, the better that it's going to be for the future. And, we've talked, Kyle Flood has his work cut out for him again this year. He had it cut out for him in 2021 too. But any type of positive developments on the offensive line, I think you just take those when you can get them right now if you're Texas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a disappointment if Andre Carrick and Jalen Garth are not two of the players at the end of spring who are singled out by coaches as, players who've made the biggest strides during the spring, because they're getting so many reps against a veteran defensive line, a deep defensive line. And this is the balancing act that Steve Sarkisian is in. Because of the lack of depth on offense, they're having to be careful about how much they scrimmage. So, these Saturdays that have been scrimmages in the past are now partial scrimmages. They're practices, and then there are scrimmage situations because they just can't burn these receivers and these offensive linemen out um, to conduct practice. They can't afford any soft tissue injuries, and knock on wood, that hasn't been an issue except for, guys like Juan Davis in and out of the lineup. But, Jameer Johnson was a guy who missed a little bit at the beginning, but now he's getting some praise. He's running a lot of second team corner. And so, so far so good in terms of managing the depth and kind of surviving this spring while trying to get quality work in, but not as much scrimmaging as they've done in the past. All right, Taylor, let's switch over to defense. Give me something that stands out on defense at the midpoint of spring.
I think that for me, Chip, it's the progression of Jahdae Barron at the nickel position. I mean, this is a guy that has gotten a lot of praise, not only just from Steve Sarkisian, but also from Anthony Cook. I talked to Anthony Cook on Saturday after the practice on Saturday, and one of the guys that he first pointed to as a guy that's really been kind of taking that next step is Jahdae Barron at the nickel position. Obviously, Anthony Cook knows that position well because he's playing currently at safety. He was getting, I guess, a little bit of reps allegedly at nickel because Sark called him a defensive back last week, but he's playing mainly at safety when he was the starting nickel. And, Anthony Cook played that position so well, I feel, in 2021 that he's a type of guy who's going to know what good play looks like there. And he singled out Jahdae Barron as a guy that's really, stepped up and kind of answered the call a little bit with that nickel role being open with Anthony Cook moving to safety. So I think that's something, that is a positive development, obviously, especially when you're hearing it not just from coaches and but also from the players that are in the locker room, the players that are on that side of the ball, the players who have played that position. And if Anthony Cook is talking him up, not asked specifically about him, brought him up specifically about the players that stand out, that's a good sign. So I would say that for the defensive side of the ball, that would be mine. What about you?
Yeah, and I think Jahdae Barron is a great example of a guy who's seizing an opportunity. I've been intrigued with Jahdae Barron ever since BJ Foster told us that his interception against Arkansas was based on Jahdae Barron telling him what play was coming. I just from that point on, I'm like, why isn't Jahdae Barron on the field more? Anyway.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
one thing I would say, I think he's also kind of coming into more of a leadership role too. Sark today after practice talking about a number of the guys who, may have not really had too much of a voice previously on defense just because of, whether they were, kind of fresh or new or green at the position. And this is really a chance for him to kind of make a claim also as in a leadership role, in that secondary, because that secondary needs leadership. Let's be real. I mean,
Big
last
time.
year was pieced together. I mean, it was basically the Anthony Cook and Josh Thompson show, and that was it. And there were how many other, three others out there that just were kind of let down. So yeah, I think that that's another thing too. And that'll be interesting to see how the comfortability and like the leadership comes along with it too.
Yeah. Well, so I'm gonna go right kind of piggyback on what you said. And, I think the fact that Anthony Cook and Keaton Crawford have been running first team safety through the first half of spring ball. And from what I'm hearing, playing solid. And, there's chemistry there. And the fact that, you know, the teammates will talk about both of these guys being dogs, that they're about the team, they're about making plays, they're about, um, trying to get to the next level and are willing to put in the work to do it. Now, you don't know what you've got until you're under adversity or you've just given up a big play on defense or the momentum has just swung like it did in the Red River shootout. That's when you find out, okay, do we got dogs or do we got dogs? And
We got
and so
dogs or we got puppies back.
right. So we're not there yet. We're not ready to anoint Anthony Cook or Keaton Crawford at this point, but this is such a big development because we've talked about all the exodus from the safety position from, Chris Adamora and BJ Foster, Tyler Owens, Xavier Alford, Marcus Caldwell, they're all gone. And Caden Stearns left early for the NFL. And so they're pulling guys, they're pulling Keaton Crawford from corner. Maurice Blackwell is running second team safety. They pulled him from linebacker.
Right.
And JD Coffey, and who's, in his second year in the program. But Anthony Cook was a productive player. So was Jahdae Barron, your guy. And they've got to get the most productive players on the field, and they got to get them in positions where they can have an impact. And so I think the more we hear about Anthony Cook and Keaton Crawford playing well at safety, that's great news for Texas football, because the secondary is where all the communication seemed to break down, especially right up the middle of the defense. The safety position, I mean, it was a revolving door. It was Brennan Schooler, it was Jaron Thompson, it was BJ Foster, and then toward the end of the season, it was, all right, let's get some other guys in here. Let's. I'm not happy with the effort. Steve Sarkisian saying that in that K-State game.
Yeah.
You had such good effort everywhere else, and then you had some blooper type effort in the secondary, and guys got benched in that game. So, where was that earlier in the year? But hey, whatever it takes. And if that mindset now is, if you're not all in, you're not in, you're not going to be on the field, then that's where things need to be. I mean, that's when the culture, starts to, that toughness and accountability starts to kick in, and they need that kind of toughness and accountability at the safety position, at nickel, at the back end of your defense. You can't be, guessing. You can't be, you got to know exactly what you're doing. And I loved what Anthony Cook said on Saturday when he said, look, I've played corner, I've played nickel. I know where guys are supposed to be now that I'm at safety. And I have high hopes for Anthony Cook. I hope it turns into a great year for him. I hope it's a year that we talk about and say, man, Anthony Cook, what a story. Same with Jahdae Barron, same with Keaton Crawford, because all these guys have made plays. They just haven't been on the field consistently to show that they can do it consistently. So,
And speaking of, that, the effort level, especially Chip, when you're talking about that, that reminds me, we need to get Michael Griffin back on after spring. Hopefully he's been able to go out to some practices, because when we had him on during the season, we had him on during the bye week coming out or after the Oklahoma game. And he was brutally honest in talking about the lack of effort especially at the safety position, especially against Oklahoma. And I mean, we had a conversation with him a little bit, even behind the scenes. I won't express what he said to me and Chip when we weren't recording, but it was very clear that that was a huge problem, and it was such a problem that it made former players that played in the secondary angry about the lack of effort, especially against a rival like Oklahoma. And so the more those guys can be the consistent players, as you said, the more the opportunity they have to be able to play consistently, the better. And I also think, Texas really kind of has lacked that leadership from a vocal leadership too, from the safety position ever since Brandon Jones left. Chip, I mean, he was fit, but he probably never got the credit that he was due, but he was phenomenal at making sure that the players were lined up correctly, just being that voice on the defense. And really, Texas has not really had that since he left for the NFL. So the more positive developments that we can hear, I think, right now about Anthony Cook and Keaton Crawford, and then also with Anthony Cook coming out, being able to be a little bit more vocal. Steve Sarkisian mentioned him as another guy that, when you play cornerback, you don't really need to be vocal. You're not yelling out where things are going. The people behind you are. And now he's in a position where he is able to yell that out. And Sark pointed to him about being, a guy that is kind of taking those steps and those strides. And the more that happens, the better this defense is going to be.
yeah, it is interesting that Anthony Cook and Jahdae Barron both are now in vocal roles in the secondary. And when they were playing corner, as you mentioned, you're being told what to do.
Right.
And so, and I would obviously say, I mean, there's excitement about Ryan Watts. He's come in 6'3" corner, and from what I'm hearing, he is just kind of locked down the left corner position. While Deshaun Jameson and Jalen Gilbo have rotated some at the ones, Ryan Watts is like locked down a starting position at corner, at least up to this point in terms of his running with the ones. That's a huge development because you lose Josh Thompson. You've got to have a guy come in who gives you confidence, who's able to, have a presence and at 6'3" and a guy who's played at Ohio State, like a native Texan from Little Elm. Ryan Watts has certainly been a big time story up to this point of
Yeah.
spring as well.
And him locking down that, now let's hope he has some lockdown corner play when he's on the field in
Right.
the football season. He's secured the role as of right now. Now let's see that continue.
Right. And Steve Sarkisian has said, I'm glad to hear it. I think Texas fans are going to be glad to hear it, that he wants stickier coverage. He wants the corners up on receivers. He doesn't want the free completions that they've been giving up, the short stuff that turns into long stuff. And he wants his corners to be able to get up on receivers and, impact their ability to get off for those quick slants and a lot of the RPO stuff that has hurt Texas. And I think that's a welcome, um, wish or demand or whatever. You're either coaching it or letting it happen. Steve Sarkisian says he wants tighter coverage. He said, obviously, you can play a little tighter when you have a better pass rush, or you can, hope that your coverage is good enough that it allows your pass rush time to get there. So either way, he wants his corners to be up tighter on the receivers, and that is, I think, welcome news for all Texas fans. All right, so Taylor, a concern at this point, midway through spring football.
I think I'm gonna stick with offensive line. I mean, here's the thing though. Offensive line was going to be the depth that offensive line was going to be a concern regardless of what has happened through the first 7 practices of spring football. I mean, they moved Sawyer Gorham Welsh from defensive line to offensive line to help, build a little bit of depth there. There's just a lot of unknowns, I would say, right now. That's not too much of a surprise, but it still remains a concern to me. And so I would say that that's got to be the first thing in my mind when I think of concerns about Texas football. I'm starting with the offensive line. What about
Yeah.
you, Chip?
Well, I'm gonna say the quarterbacks, and it's not, it's just because there's some things that we aren't going to know until game time.
Mhm.
And we've talked a lot about Hudson Card, and I asked Steve Sarkisian today about Hudson Card, and look, he's in his second year in the offense. He should be further ahead of Quinn Ewers, and Steve Sarkisian said, yeah, he knows the concepts and probably more about the totality of the offense, but Quinn Ewers just needs to make sure he masters what we're installing that day, and then the next day when we install something else, he needs to master that and what we installed the previous day, and so forth and so on. We're not going to know how Hudson Card's pocket presence has truly improved, maybe even until the Alabama game, if he's the starter, because he's the veteran guy. So much still has to play out. But I just would say, with no veteran in the room, um, you've got your most experiences in his second year in this offense. You've got an unbelievably talented quarterback in Quinn Ewers, because he can make all the throws. We've seen that from what we've been able to watch in practice. It's impressive. Both of them throw, pretty footballs. But what's it going to be like when the guard misses his block and you've got a 300-pound 3 technique bearing down on you, and Um, Steve Sarkisian talked today about, I love this phrase. I got to find it. The contact commitment. Um, it's, where the quarterback has to stand in there and knows he's going to get hammered and be willing to take that hit.
Yeah.
And that's something that Hudson Card is. We got to see that. We got to see that from him, that he can take that big hit, come back, stand in the pocket, take another hit, and have that pocket presence that his teammates are going to, believe in and play for.
Right. And Steve Sarkisian did say sometimes, as you said, like the contact, but he said sometimes it's good if the quarterback gets hit because it's like, oh, I can get up. I can get up from that. So I think that you're right. That's going to be something that you're going to see more in live game reps. Now, as
Contact courage. Sorry,
contact,
Taylor.
okay,
Contact courage.
contact courage. Yeah. And I think the other funny thing is, since obviously quarterbacks don't really get hit ever in spring practice. Sark, when that was mentioned in a question today, Sark's like, well, they're not supposed to. You should tell Keandre that. So I think Keandre Coburn may be going after the quarterbacks a little bit when he's not supposed to. But I think you're right. I think any type of you want to see a big leap in development and production from Hudson Card, and it starts with him and his pocket presence. I mean, how many times do we hear last year Steve Sarkisian talk about happy feet? He has happy feet when he's in the pocket. The other thing, though, he did say, and this was kind of surprising, Chip, was that with Hudson Card, he said he's like, his legs are a weapon too. And Sark, acknowledged that they're not really the type that are going to really utilize a running quarterback. However, they're not going to take that weapon away if Hudson Card can use it. So that's going to be kind of interesting to see how that works, and how Hudson Card, if he can maybe take the step that Sam Ehlinger eventually took with the more experience he did get. He had happy feet. His first thing, I think, when he felt pressure was to tuck it and run. And obviously he could do it because he was a bulldozer out there. I mean, he was basically a linebacker playing quarterback. And so, Hudson Card's different build, obviously, but it's going to be very intriguing to watch when, things start breaking down in the pocket, if he can keeps his composure, or if he, does a run out, and which of those runs are designed, by by this coaching staff, because that'll be something different than what Quinn Ewers, I think, brings to the table too.
Yeah, and Quinn can run. Now, when last we saw Quinn in 2020, he was coming off a tough injury, and we talked to Riley
Hernia
Dodge.
surgery, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, we talked to Riley Dodge about it. Make sure you go back through all the Flagship podcast interviews, because we had a great conversation with Riley Dodge, Quinn Ewers' high school coach at South Lake Carroll, about how tough Quinn Ewers is and how athletic he is. And he said people didn't even see his athleticism in that at the end of that 2020 season when he came back from injury, fought through it, and led his team probably a year early to the state championship game against Westlake. And so Quinn Ewers can move around. The thing that I hope that Steve Sarkisian and AJ Milwee make clearer to the quarterbacks is, because they don't call quarterback runs, and in fact, they discourage it because they don't want the quarterback getting hurt. But yet, Casey Thompson and Hudson Card both had run ability when things broke down to go get 6 yards, get a first down, move the chains. But it sounded like there was confusion among the quarterbacks about, when am I supposed to run? When am I supposed to keep my eyes downfield? And Steve Sarkisian talked about that today. Are you looking down when the rush is coming, or are your eyes up looking downfield, trying to keep the play alive, trying to slide in the pocket and get to where you can find a window to make the throw, versus when to just purely tuck it and run? And I think Sark talks a lot about feel, and feel is going to be when it works, right? I mean, it's going to be interesting. I think that that is a component of both of these quarterbacks that may have to come into play again, Taylor, because look, when your offensive line is struggling or growing or whatever the term we're going to use, rebuilding, having a quarterback who can run or throw on the run, bootlegs, waggles, that's what Colt McCoy and Jordan Shipley did all of 2009. They moved the pocket.
Mhm.
They kind of moved away from the weaknesses of the offensive line and tried to just buy a little bit of time for Colt McCoy to find Jordan Shipley downfield. And that was one thing that I was disappointed with in Steve Sarkisian last year. Felt like he he was so committed to what he wanted to get done in his pro style offense that he didn't really waver to try to win with the adjust things to the talent that he had in year one, because he is recruiting big strong armed quarterbacks like Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning, and he wants to let everyone know we're a pro style offense, we're running what the NFL's running. I'm not really going to waver from that. And that, look, that each coach has to make his own decisions. We saw Tom Herman kind of burn his first year at Texas to burn his culture in, guys who could help, like Armani Foreman and Chris Warren kind of got thrown to the side because he didn't really care for their practice habits. And by God, we're going to do it my way. And they struggled.
Mhm.
And those guys were playmakers. Let's see how far this offense can go, because man, when you play a pro style offense, you are asking a lot of your offensive line. You're gonna zone block, you're gonna block gaps. You're asking these guys to do a lot. And we saw Dave Aranda bring in Jeff Grimes from BYU, and they simplified everything. They just ran wide zone, cut blocking, kind of the San Francisco 49ers, old Denver Broncos scheme, where I don't need to have the best athletes on the offensive line. I just need you to kind of move along with the defenders and then cut block them, and let my running back find a seam to run through. So, you know, and Baylor's the Big 12 champions, and
Yeah.
they went from 2-7 to Big 12 champs. So, different ways to get it done. But let's see if it just, the decision making should be more decisive from the quarterback position, and that's going to be on Steve Sarkisian and AJ Milwee to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, and a part of me wonders, Chip, I mean, hindsight's 2020, obviously. And I know the old, adage is the best coaches coach to the talent that they have and not coach their talent to the scheme that they like to run. But it is a little bit tricky when you're dealing with recruiting too, because if say Sarkeesian gave a little bit and all you see are the quarterbacks at Texas really turning into essentially Sam Ellinger again, like a running type of quarterback. Sam Ellinger, that's what he was coined as, even though he progressed significantly in with his pocket presence and not just tucking and run it as he got more experience and more comfortable playing at the college level, he was still in his last year at Texas considered the running quarterback, and he wasn't, running all the time like he was prior to that. So, I feel like it's a weird, probably balancing act that college coaches anywhere, but a coach like Steve Sarkisian is in when he doesn't necessarily feel that the quarterback of the future at the time, at least in year one, may not have been on the roster, or what he had was not what he was the ideal quarterback room that he would want to have, and he has to recruit to the quarterback room that he wants to have. And if you have the guy that takes after Sam Ellinger running the ball a lot, maybe these pro style quarterbacks, the Arch Mannings, are going to be like, well, they don't really run the type of quarterback play that I'm comfortable with. And then you get out of the race with those guys. So it's a weird balancing act with college coaching, I think, especially when coaches take over at a program and, obviously don't have their own guys, their own recruited players on the roster, that you kind of have to be a little bit of the not give as much as you would like to, just because you've got to think about the future too, and not just what's going on that day. And I know that's not what Texas fans want to hear. Any fan doesn't want to hear that, but you got to build for the future. And if, with Steve Sarkisian being such a elite quarterback developer, known as more of a quarterback guru in college football. I mean, he's got to get the guys that he believes will be the ones he can develop and develop in his scheme. And so I just kind of wonder if there was no leash because of that, if that played a role, Chip, with him not really wanting to do any design quarterback runs or giving Casey Thompson or Hudson Card much of a leash in running the ball, because he didn't want, to look like that's what they're going to be doing at Texas after Sam Ehlinger was quarterback for 4 years, kind of doing that similar style of play.
Right. Right. And that's the $1 million question. Year one, you're trying to establish to everyone, recruits, the guys who are going to come in and ultimately turn things around, that this is our identity. This is what we do. And of course, Steve Sarkisian, how many times did we hear him say last year, the more things we do on offense, the harder we are to defend. Where other coaches are like, we need to simplify. We need to simplify. Steve Sarkisian is, no, we need to be complex. In fact, Steve Sarkisian said, I cut things back in late in some of those losses where they had a double-digit lead in the third quarter, instead of sticking with the more complex stuff, which in hindsight, we ran pretty well. Mm-hmm. And that's big too, Taylor. I mean, Steve Sarkisian, look, the players always know if things are getting simplified and the defense is able to kind of lock in on what you're doing, it gets harder. The players know that. And so, Steve Sarkisian has to keep the gas down. He's talking about all gas, no brakes. Okay, well, trust your players. You've been working on this stuff. Keep going with your motions and your complex stuff, because your players can handle it, and it's harder for the defense to handle. Hopefully, these are all the lessons that have been learned in the self-scout after 5 and 7. You bring in Gary Patterson. What did you see? Where did we make it easier for the defense? That's why you bring in a guy like Gary Patterson, so that he can go back and look at your tendencies in the second half of those games and say, well, here's what I see. Mm-hmm. And this made it easier for the defense to kind of lock in on what you're doing. Hopefully all that has already happened. And now we see what lessons have been learned, not just by players, all these players we've talked about in today's podcast, but also by this coaching staff. So
yeah, for sure. And you need you need multiple, you need more than just two playmakers on offense too. And that was a hindrance at Texas. And I'm not trying to ignore, Casey Thompson. He was playing very well, prior to his injury in the Oklahoma game. But, the two main playmakers were a running back and one wide receiver, and defenses can figure it out, adjust. And if they're the offense is being simplified, they know they're going to those two guys. I mean, it's no secret. And then if they're simplifying everything around them, I mean, yeah, you're right. That's a really good point to bring up.
Yeah, and you kind of kept waiting. Okay, when are they gonna, throw it a little more to Jared Wiley, the big tight end down the field? Okay, he doesn't block like you'd like, but he can catch and he can get downfield. They ran a wheel route to Cade Brewer in the final seconds of the Kansas game, put it into overtime. Where was that all year? I mean, they were just there. Sometimes you gotta trust that guys can make a play for you, and you don't know that until you run the play for them.
Right.
And so we'll see what's been learned. But again, a third of your roster is gone. You're bringing in new faces for a third of your roster. This is a rebuild. And even though you've got some veteran guys in different positions, defensive line, whatever, receiver, you got a good front line, top three. You're starting over at tight end. You're starting over at quarterback in a lot of ways. You're starting over at safety, starting over at corner, with the exception of Deshaun Jameson. So, it's people are like, man, what do you think? What do you think? 9-3? I'm like, no, I'm not there yet. I'm at 6-6. I'm going to go, we said this today on the podcast. Incremental progress seems to be the catchphrase of this spring football with Sark. He said he's seeing incremental progress from, guys on the offensive line, incremental progress from the edge rusher position. Incremental progress from Anthony Cook and Keaton Crawford at safety. So,
And the tight ends, Jatavian
and the
Sanders,
tight
right?
ends,
So,
right?
yeah.
Davian Sanders and Gunnar Helm, and Jaleel Billingsley. From what I hear, I mean, this guy may be Troy O'Meary. I don't know. We'll see. But incremental progress. I'm not giving. I'm not. I'm not jumping ahead of myself here. After what happened last year, you're gonna have to show me, don't tell me, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like, it's hard to kinda give the benefit of the doubt after a 5-7 season. So, yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, I'm not I'm not predicting anything major for Texas, at least right now, you know? I mean, I can't tell you that after 7 spring practices, and I don't think anyone can. I don't think Sark can right now. So, and
I think
that's
Sark's been kind of, he's been tempering things like with this incremental progress.
mhm.
It's
It's smart
I-
though for him to do
it
it.
is. It
Like,
is.
yeah.
It is. I think it's a rebuild.
Mhm.
So we'll see how some of these young offensive linemen do when they get here in June.
Yeah.
We don't even have all the players on this team, especially some of these impact, Brennan Thompson, some of the guys who are going to come in, have a chance to make an impact in the fall aren't even on campus yet. All right, Taylor, we'll get to love it or leave it in just a second. Texas baseball wins the series over Oklahoma, and it was a good news, bad news situation for Oklahoma. I mean, you had an unbelievable performance from Pete Hansen, and then they lose game 2, so they go into that Sunday decider, and Lucas Gordon struggles. They go down 7-1, but they come all the way back. And what Austin Todd, his first start back from the shoulder injury he suffered on March 8th against Texas State. He goes 3 for 5, gets the first hit of the game in the 5th inning, and then starts the 6-run rally that ties the game, ends up getting another hit in a 5-run 9th inning. And Murphy Staley, what can you say about this guy? He's hit in 14 straight games. He's batting a Big 12 best 458, and it's a phenomenal story. I mean, Murphy Staley is just absolutely killing it at the plate for Texas. So bad news, Lucas Gordon, who looked like he was settling into that Sunday starter role that he took over for Tanner Witt, struggles. But the bats continue to come alive for Texas, and to come back from 7-1 down in the deciding game in that series and win it 12-7 at Globe Life Field in Arlington shows this Texas team is resilient, and they've got some studs at the plate for sure.
Well, yeah, and that's even before we're really talking about much about Ivan Melendez, but he was named the National College Baseball Writers Association Player of the Month for the month of March. Chip, Ivan Melendez in the month of March hit 473 with 11 home runs and 29 RBIs.
Yeah, I mean,
1 month.
Pete
That's
Hansen said there are pitches I can't throw him.
yeah.
Like he's seeing it so well, and he continues to see it so well. And that, Hodo has been hitting well. Eric Kennedy, you got guys who can come through when it's needed, and impressive stuff. And Austin Todd coming back, first start after missing 8 games, and he goes 3 for 5 and gets some crucial hits, like a 2-out hit uh, in that rally, the 6-run rally that tied the game 7-7. It's big time. It wasn't pretty that Texas pitching gave up all the runs, and they got into that hole. But wow, I mean, no lead is safe on this Texas team for sure.
Yeah, that 3-4 spot on the lineup is just monstrous. Like,
Fun to watch.
absolutely,
It's fun to
like
watch. Dylan Campbell with a 3-run bomb over the weekend. I mean, good stuff. And they'll play UT Rio Grande Valley And then TCU under new coach Kirk Sarloos coming to the dish this weekend. TCU 19-9. That will be a good test for the Horns, who are now 3-3 in Big 12 play after dropping that series to Texas Tech and then winning the OU series 2-1. All right, Taylor, and Texas softball, got to give them some love. 18-1-1 in their last 20 games. We talked about the roles are settling in. Janae Jefferson, unbelievable at the plate for Texas, but Haley Dolcini and Estelle Check and Sophia Simpson on the mound for Texas have settled in. And next up for Texas, number 1 ranked Oklahoma. So let's and that's April 12th. It's not this weekend, April 14th. Sorry. So they're off this weekend, and then they'll take on the Sooners. All right, Taylor, you ready for some love it or leave it?
I am. Before we get to love it or leave it, we're going to take a really quick break, but stick around because football talk will continue, including some more talk about the quarterback position. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on here. Chip, you ready for some more football talk
Let's
and
do it.
love it or leave it? All right.
Yeah.
My first one for you is love it or leave it. As of right now, you think Isaiah Neyor finishes as the receiving yards leader for the Longhorns in 2022?
You know what? As of right now, I'm going to love this. As of right now, I'm going to love this. Here's the deal. Xavier Worthy defenses are going to game plan for him because of what he did last year, his speed, his ability to turn a short play into a big play touchdown. And a quarterback loves a big receiver, and especially young quarterbacks. Because remember, Sam Ehlinger developed pocket presence when he had guys like Colin Johnson, Lil Jordan Humphrey, guys who were 6'5".
Mm-hmm.
And what have we heard about Isaiah Neyor? Catch radius. Jordan Whittington last week talked about the dude catches everything in a 6-yard radius when he was talking about Isaiah Neyor. He also said that Nair's a guy you only have to tell him once and he gets it. And that's also, go back and read our insider about Isaiah Neyor right after he signed, because I mean, part of the reason he's leaving Wyoming is he feels like he can go to the NFL and he wants to be in a more prolific passing offense. I think this guy has a chance. I mean, look, we're probably splitting hairs. These are both, we talk about Neyor and Worthy, probably talk about two receivers who could both go over 1,000 yards if they get the quarterback play and the protection up front. So these are good questions, good, things to be sort of chopping it up about. But yeah, why not? I'll love this right now. Taylor, how about you?
Man, this is hard. Just because Xavier Worthy was so just electric, I would say last year. I mean, teams were game planning and double teaming him, and he still was getting catches. And so, um, I don't know. I think you're right. I think we're kind of splitting hairs here, assuming these two players continue to progress the way that they are as of right now. I think I'm going to leave it, and I think I'm gonna give Xavier Worthy a little bit of credit, saying that he's going to have back-to-back seasons as of right now as the leading receiver. But man, this is hard. It's kind of like when when Lil Jordan Humphrey and Colin Johnson and Devin Duvernay, were on campus for Sam Ellinger. Is like all three of those guys had obviously enough talent and skills to at one point in their careers be the team's leading receiver. And I think what wasn't Lil Jordan Humphrey and Colin Johnson was what, like 20 yards away from 1,000 yards that one year, and Lil Jordan Humphrey did surpass 1,000 yards. I think that's what it was.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I think that these two could be very similar, and that's a good, bringing up the height. That's a very good point. I can't count out my man Xavier Worthy, so I'm going to say that he's going to follow it up with another solid year.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, good questions to have.
Yes, no
These
doubt.
are positive. All right, love it or leave it. Number 2.
All right, my second one is love it or leave it. The way the quarterback situation is shaping up, it's a carbon copy of last year with Hudson Card playing the role of Casey Thompson and Quinn Ewers playing the role of Card in 2021.
Yeah, I'm gonna I mean, I guess I can leave it in the sense that um, Casey Thompson was in his first year with Steve Sarkisian in terms of the offense. But it is similar. I mean, it is similar from this standpoint that Hudson Card is seen as the veteran now, even though he's a redshirt sophomore in his second year in the Sarkisian offense. So, um, and Quinn Ewers is the hot shot. He's the number one recruit in the country for 2021. And so all the excitement and anticipation is around Quinn Ewers and what his recruiting ranking and everything says he could be. And there were rumblings last year about Hudson Card throwing it like Aaron Rodgers. I still to this day say tap the brakes on whoever was murmuring that out there to Bruce Feldman. But
Well, they said it
um
to some other people in the market too, and some other people in the market grasps a hold of it. It's like, hey, maybe you should go out to practice before. I won't call out who it is, but maybe you should go to practice before you start just claiming this is fact when you haven't seen this guy.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I'll love it from that standpoint that Hudson Card is now the guy who's got to um, grind and show that he can handle the job with the hot shot now coming up, you know, behind him. So I'll love it. I'll love it, even though it's not identical. I'll love this. How about you?
I mean, there's definitely similarities, when as you had mentioned, I mean, Hudson Card is considered the quote unquote veteran in the quarterback room, just as Casey Thompson was considered the quote unquote veteran, going into last season, even though he had only played in one half of a football game. I mean, Hudson Card at least has a little bit more experience in the college level and has started some games, but still, yeah, I mean, it's a very similar situation. I'm not sure I would say it's I don't know because I do feel like the quarterback position is a little bit stronger right now than it was in spring of 2021. And I'm not trying to knock on anybody that was in the quarterback room. I'm just saying from, as you mentioned, having a guy that has been in the offense that they're going to be running this season, that already kind of gives them a leg up a little bit in the room. And then plus, adding a generational type of talent in Quinn Ewers, I feel like the position itself is in a much more stable place as of right now. So I think I'm going to leave it on that account, but there's no denying that there's definitely a lot of similarities and kind of where what we were talking about in spring football, last year at this time compared to what we're talking about now. I would say it's pretty similar. So, but I'm gonna have to leave it and say that just with Hudson Card having a little bit the experience at the in this offense, I think gives it a little bit of a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of upside.
Hmm.
There's a lot of upside at the quarterback position. I'm just not sure where they are right now.
Right.
Like
Hmm.
how long is it going to take to get to total comfortability and letting all that arm talent flourish without having to think their way through plays and the guard missed the block. I'm about to get creamed by the three technique. Do I run? Do I try to throw it? All that. And that it's reps, it's game. it's game action, and we have to wait, and we have to see them in action and see how they respond to adversity.
Yeah.
All right, Taylor, love it or leave it, number 3.
Never, but real quick before I get there, does if Hudson Card technically could have 4 years of eligibility left, right? If he were to do a true red shirt, because his quote unquote red shirt year was the COVID season.
Right,
It's
he's
just
got
now, so he's technically, if he redshirted another time, he would still have 4 years at Texas left, right?
well, he would have this is his 3rd year. He's a sophomore. He would have 2 more years after this.
Yeah, I'm saying if he were to redshirt one of those, like say, like God forbid, like any injury or anything, like Quinn Ewers comes on or something, and Hudson Card doesn't. I mean, his red shirt was the COVID year. I was just curious. I was trying to like play that out in my head, like if he could actually be there a little
Right,
bit longer. Yeah, it's weird.
right. Yeah.
All right, sorry. Now, random topic there, tangent there, but all right. My final one for you, Chip, is love it or leave it. The player most in jeopardy of being left out of the starting lineup right now is safety Jaron Thompson.
Hmm. You know what? I'll love this. I'll love this right now. I mean, I could argue that Jalen Ford is making a big push that could, move Luke Brockermeyer out at middle linebacker. But the fact that Jaron Thompson is practicing and he's backing up Jade Barron at nickel, and he's a backup safety to Anthony Cook and Keaton Crawford, I'm gonna love this because Jaron Thompson he's practicing, and he's got to make his statement when he's on the field, either at nickel or at safety. And we've seen him at safety. And look, they're growing pains. He had an up and down year for sure. I mean, there are some plays that Texas fans are thinking about right now that Jaron Thompson didn't make. And hopefully they're thinking about, a couple that he did make as well later in the year. But the point is, he's not getting most of the first team reps at safety or nickel right now. Right now, he can make a push, change all that. But I will love this right now, Taylor. How about you?
I agree. I'm gonna love this as well. And Chip, when you mentioned that, he's getting reps behind Jade Barron at nickel, and then he's running second team behind Anthony Cook and Keaton Crawford at safety. Those are all players that are at new positions, and they are still somehow ahead of him. Where Anthony Cook was behind Josh Thompson and Deshaun Jameson on the depth chart at corner last year. And then they moved him to nickel and he got a starting role. That's not what is happening with Jaron Thompson. It seems like guys are moving to these positions and then they're still above him. And I that's especially at safety. I would say that that's got to be an eye opener if you're him. I would hope it's an eye opener. If my goodness, like two guys that had never played safety are somehow running with the ones and you're behind, like how do you not sit there and think about what you're possibly doing wrong or not doing good enough or not doing enough of to change that? Because that's it's kind of, I mean, it's shocking to me. Would you agree? I mean, like I'm kind of floored by that. Like you usually don't see this happen when players move positions and all of a sudden take over for a guy that started nearly every game last year. I mean, that's if this isn't a wake up call for Jaron Thompson, I don't know what is. But yeah, I have to love this and say that if something doesn't click there, then right now, he's absolutely the player probably most in jeopardy of being left out of the starting lineup. And again, that's right now, as you said too. Like we want to hit that home. We're not saying that he doesn't have an opportunity to, make up for kind of falling behind here. And he's shown flashes, not consistently. He's shown some really poor moments too, but you can tell there's talent there. And so it's just a matter of if it's going to click or not for him, or if he's going to, take this personally and really try to fight to get that role back. And so it's a huge spring and a huge offseason for him for sure.
Yeah, yeah, because he's been in the starting lineup, and now he's looking up
Mm.
at others who are getting that opportunity now. So,
And that had never played the positions that he was getting the starting roles at.
right.
That's yeah.
And good for the Texas coaching staff to look where the production was and get those players on the field and see.
Mhm.
We got to see. We got to see if Anthony Cook is a natural safety. We got to see if Keaton Crawford can be a natural safety, because Sark talked about the perspective of the field when you move from corner to safety. You're at corner, you're zeroed in on either your man or your part of the field, not the whole field.
Mhm.
At safety, you're scanning the entire field, and you got to recognize things quickly and make those calls quickly and loudly. But one thing about our man Jade Barron that Josh Thompson said in the Flagship podcast interview is that he'll echo calls, even calls that don't have anything to do with him,
Yeah.
to make sure that the rest of the defense hears it. And that's the kind of little thing that adds up with coaches, making sure that your teammates hear what they're supposed to hear, even if it has nothing to do with you. That's the kind of communication, especially when things are going bad or adversity has struck, that is reassuring to teammates and is necessary, because that's what we heard, that the communication would break down when adversity would strike in the second half of those games where Texas gave up leads. So
It's like
those are
having
the little.
coaches on the field. You want that.
Right,
You
right.
want to have coaches on, like, there's only so much that a coach can do on game day. And you want to make sure that your players are taking what they've learned and bringing it onto the field and helping coach on the field, because they're not on headsets when they don't have headphones in their helmets where they can hear what their coaches are saying when they're on the field. So you need the players that turn into coaches on the field, and Texas has lacked that. And I think this is a good sign, though.
Yeah. I mean, Sark came out and said it today that there were times last year where half the defense was getting one call and the other half was getting another call. Oh boy. Okay. Well, listen, hopefully those days are in the past, because I don't know if we can take watching that anymore,
No.
Taylor. But listen, thanks everybody for listening to our recap of the midpoint of spring football 2022. We will be back next week to tell you about the next set of spring practices, and maybe everything we said today will be different. Who knows?
Never.
Maybe so much will have changed that you'll just have to tune in and see what is going on with these Texas Longhorns as they try to climb out with new vision, new tenacity, new everything in 2022 under Steve Sarkisian. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. For Taylor Estes, I am Chip Brown. We'll see you over at Horns 24/7. Until next time, stay safe, keep the faith.